My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34. My parents never yelled, never hit, never raised their hands or their voices. Instead, they used disappointment like a leash and silence like a weapon. I spent most of my 20s thinking I was the difficult one, until I had my son. Caleb taught me that hunger doesn't always start in the stomach. Sometimes it starts with being told lunch is for family, and you're just visiting. That was the moment everything snapped. The moment I stopped being their daughter and started becoming my own witness. What they didn't know was I've spent my whole life watching. This time I made sure someone else did too. Subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Papa said lunch is for family, and I'm just visiting. My son's voice was small. Too small for a boy who loved reading aloud about galaxies. I froze mid-step, the phone pressed to my cheek, my hand still hovering above the stovetop dial. Outside, Maplewood shimmered in the sticky breath of early June, but my bones ran cold. I knew that tone, that pause, that quiet, trembling way Caleb reserved only for moments he didn't understand, or worse moments he understood too well. 2 days ago, a faulty wire in our apartment sparked an electrical fire in the wall behind the fridge. The building inspector called it uninhabitable until rewiring, and my landlord texted an apology that didn't sound like he meant it. I barely had time to grab toothbrushes and Caleb's inhaler. When my mother offered to take him for just a few days while I sorted things out, I hesitated. Memories swirled the soy sauce-stained letter, the silence that followed. But then she said, "Claire, don't be dramatic. It's just practical. Let the boy stay in a stable house for once." And practicality had always been their favorite disguise for rejection. So I packed Caleb's things down to his favorite spoon. I labeled containers, wrote out his bedtime rituals, included a laminated allergy list like a mother sending her child to the moon. I even kissed his forehead twice, once for comfort, once for apology. That was Sunday. Today was Wednesday. Crackers. I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "What else did you eat, honey?" There was a pause. I could hear the scratch of the phone against his cheek. Just some juice and a yogurt cup. Yesterday, Papa said not to touch the fruit drawer because it's for the party. And lunch today. His reply came with the softness of surrender. Nothing. Papa said lunch is for family. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even hang up properly. I drove through the night, skipping toll roads and Reason. The only thing I could hear was Caleb's voice replaying in my skull like a broken lullaby. Their house stood on a tree-lined cul-de-sac, the kind where mailboxes had engraved family names and flower beds bloomed in perfect symmetry. It looked like a postcard. And like all postcards, it left out the truth. When I pushed open the front door, the smell hit me first, syrupy sweet like maple sausage. I followed the scent into the kitchen where the table was set for 3. My father sat in his usual seat, slicing into a pancake stack like a man cutting down problems. My mother, pristine in a robin's egg blue cardigan, flipped through Better Homes and Gardens as if flipping through reasons not to care. And at the far end of the table, Caleb. He sat quietly, his tiny legs dangling from the oversized chair. His plate was empty. His eyes flicked toward mine, then away as if unsure I was real. I knelt beside him, cupped his cheek, and whispered, "We're leaving." That was when my mother finally spoke. Without looking up, without adjusting her magazine, she said, "You're really making a scene over snacks." That night I didn't sleep. I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since high school, and wrote one line. They fed their pride more than they fed my child. The pen felt heavier than I remembered. Its weight wasn't from ink or metal, but from every word I'd never said. Every bite of my tongue. Every thank you I offered when I should have asked why Caleb slept beside me on the floor mattress of our temporary studio. He curled into his side like a comma, his breathing soft but not peaceful. I ran my fingers through his hair and counted the pauses between his breaths longer than usual. The silence in him frightened me more than any tantrum could have. The studio smelled faintly of burnt plastic and mothballs. The landlord had promised it was livable, but not much else. I didn't mind. I'd lived through worse. My phone buzzed once, an automated message about renter's insurance. I turned it face down. At breakfast, Caleb pushed toast around his plate, mumbling something about not wanting jam anymore. I nodded, didn't press. I knew the feeling of losing appetite not from food, but from what food represented. I pulled out a notepad and began to list. Not groceries, not chores, but the things Susan and Richard Ward actually valued. Reputation, appearances, the antique clock from Nantucket, Melissa's children, the garden brunches, admiration, and most of all, my silence. They never punished me for speaking. They simply trained me never to try. But silence, I was learning, could be weaponized, especially if you knew how to end it. By Thursday, I called Aunt Leah. She sounded surprised, even delighted. Claire, it's been forever. We met at a small cafe on Oakwood. She ordered lavender tea, no sugar. I asked for black coffee. I told her what happened, not in anger, not in a rush. Just the facts. Caleb. The crackers. The quote. Her eyes welled up before her cup did. I always wondered why you stopped coming to Christmas. Then, softer, I thought it was work. I smiled. It was easier than saying I didn't want to explain pain to people who were allergic to discomfort. Next, I called Mark. My cousin had always been kind in a clueless way, genuinely believing our family was something out of a holiday ad. When I told him what happened, he went quiet. Wow, I always thought your parents were so generous. I laughed once. They are, until you cost them something. I didn't need apologies. I needed witnesses. And the ripple was beginning. One afternoon after Caleb fell asleep, coloring the same tree for the 5th time, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my old English teacher, Mrs. Carlton, the one who gave me Sylvia Plath and told me the sharpest girls often get called difficult first. The subject line simply said, "Can we talk?" Within a day, she replied, "Of course, Claire. Name the time." I didn't tell her everything yet. Just that I was writing again. That I remembered her. That I hadn't forgotten how words could change rooms. Flashbacks came uninvited. I was 10, sitting at the dining table in patent leather shoes, watching the silver polish stain my fingertips. My friends were sleeping in tents in Andrea's backyard, roasting marshmallows, laughing under the stars. But Ward girls don't sleep at strangers' homes, I was told. So instead, I polished heirlooms for people who never asked if I wanted to belong. The voicemail came on a Friday evening. I didn't pick up the call. But my father left a message. "You're ruining our name over what some crackers. I played it twice," then deleted it. There was no anger in his voice, just disbelief, as if reputation were porcelain and I'd left fingerprints. After tucking Caleb in, I sat at the dining table, fold out wobbly, pressed against a borrowed lamp, and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed the title in bold, "Hunger That Speaks." They threw their annual firefighter charity BBQ in their perfectly manicured backyard. I didn't show up, but my old 4th grade teacher did, wearing a shirt that reads, "Family feeds, especially when it's hard." I saw the photos before I heard the stories. Melissa posted a filtered shot of the grill smoke curling above the gazebo. The caption read, "Ward Family BBQ Tradition, Year 12, complete with sparkles and heart emojis." The faces in the background told a different story. Smiles were there, but stiffer. Shoulders closer together, but not in warmth. More like bracing. I hadn't attended in years, not since I stopped pretending the coleslaw and applause made up for everything else. But this year, I sent someone in my place. 2 weeks ago, over a second cup of coffee with Mrs. Carlton, I told her everything. Caleb. The plate. The silence. Her eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. She nodded slowly, then said, "I always knew your words would come back around Claire. This time, they just need legs." When the invitation came, because of course my parents still sent them to her out of performance, not affection, she didn't hesitate. She showed up early, hugged Susan with the same firm grip she used when breaking up playground fights, and wore that shirt like it was pressed from scripture. I watched the live stream snippets passively shared by neighbors. The clatter of folding chairs, squeals of children darting between tables, Richard's booming laugh echoing as he flipped burgers in his smoke-for-service apron. All choreographed. Then came the clip I replayed 4 times. Mrs. Carlton standing by the potato salad, sipping lemonade, saying clearly, "Didn't bring my grandson. Didn't think guests were welcome unless they were blood." She smiled sweetly as she said it, loud enough that 3 women at the deviled egg tray turned in unison. Melissa, somewhere in the frame, froze for half a breath. Later, someone else was it, Mrs. Donnelly from church repeated the line to a city councilwoman. I could tell from the body language hands paused mid-bite eyes scanning for context. My mother tried to glide through it, of course. Float between groups with pitchers of lemonade and weaponized cheer. Her white dress perfectly starched her sandals silent on the brick pavers. But during one refill, she stumbled just enough for the pitcher to jerk water sloshing onto the monogram tablecloth. Richard tried to smooth it over, cracking loud enough for the crowd. Oh, Eileen always had a flair for drama. She once gave detention for wearing stripes with plaid. Some people laughed. Most didn't. The silence afterward lasted half a second too long. Claire Bennett didn't need to be there. The truth was working just fine without her. Later that night, Caleb was building a Lego spaceship. I was folding laundry, watching the way he placed each piece with intention. Focused. Careful. It broke me a little how much of myself I saw in him, except that I had never been given the space to be this gentle in peace. My phone buzzed. Melissa. What the hell happened? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. The truth. It finally showed up to their party. They once said this house would stay in the family forever. Now it's just a museum with no visitors. The photo paper curled slightly at the edges as I laid each image flat on the dining table. Caleb's first zoo trip, his missing front teeth in a Halloween astronaut suit, the glitter-covered certificate for best listener in first grade. In each, his eyes held something warm, something mine had learned to dim early on. I pressed the blade of the paper cutter gently along the photos. Methodical. Clean. My parents' faces disappeared bit by bit like they had never been there at all. Like they had never chosen to be. The silence in my apartment was a comfort now. Caleb was asleep in the next room, the soft click of his white noise machine masking the occasional creak of the building. I paused to glance at the clock past midnight, but I wasn't tired. This wasn't the kind of work that drained you. This was the kind that cleared space. The box was modest, sturdy. I arranged the photos carefully, each one a testament to a memory they didn't earn. On top, I placed the note. This is your family now in pictures only. You fed your pride more than you fed my child. I didn't sign it. There was no need. The next morning, I sealed the package with thick brown tape. The woman at the post office didn't even ask what was inside. She scanned the address, still embossed on thank you cards and garden party invites, and handed me a receipt. It felt like mailing a tombstone. Days passed. Then came the call. Melissa's voice was tight, hesitant, like she'd rehearsed and still didn't like how it sounded. I went over, just to see. I didn't say anything, she continued. Curtains were closed, porch light flickering, grass up to my ankles. Mom was vacuuming, but not really. Dad just walks around in his slippers. Doesn't say much. My hand rested on the edge of the kitchen counter. Then they're finally living like Caleb did. For those 2 days. Melissa didn't answer right away. I could almost hear her brain sifting through old loyalties, trying to fold this new version of our parents into the narrative she'd clung to all her life. Then softly, almost like a whisper, she regretted. They were raised different, Claire. I stared at the small square photo still tucked into my hand. Caleb feeding pigeons in the park. His smile was crooked from a missing tooth. I remembered the warmth of that day, the way he looked up at me like I could explain the whole world if I just tried hard enough. So was I said. But I don't starve children and call it discipline. Mom leaves another voicemail. If you're going to ruin our reputation, at least let us explain our side. There is no side to starving a child. I didn't even listen to the whole message. Just saw the transcript preview on my phone screen while stirring Caleb's oatmeal. At least let us explain. As if there were multiple angles to we gave your son crackers and told him lunch was for family. I tapped delete and set the spoon down gently. Caleb was humming to himself, legs swinging off the kitchen chair, focused on drawing something with 3 shades of blue. Melissa called later that morning. Her tone wasn't confrontational, more curious than anything. She'd stopped by the old house again. Said she needed to pick up some garden tools she'd left in the shed years ago. They haven't taken down the picture wall, she said quietly. But it's different now. How so, Dust? Like thick. You know how Mom used to clean them every Sunday with that vinegar spray and a cloth diaper? Now they're just dull. I waited. She keeps the curtains drawn, Melissa added. And Dad's been sleeping in the sunroom. Not because they argued, he just says the bedroom feels too big. I pictured it the pristine living room where every frame used to gleam with curated memories. Melissa's cheer photos, their vow renewal portrait vacation snapshots from trips Claire wasn't invited to. The kind of display meant for neighbors, not daughters. They're not doing well, Melissa murmured. They're doing exactly what they taught, I said, living in silence and calling it dignity. That afternoon, I opened my email and saw the subject line, "Your essay was read at last night's PTA forum." It was from a coordinator I barely knew, Alma, I think. She'd been copied on the thread when I submitted the short essay to the district newsletter. Hunger That Speaks had been meant for quiet corners, for the inboxes of those who'd scroll, sigh, and maybe reflect. I never expected someone to print it. The email continued. Several parents asked if you'd consider speaking at the Fall Parent Leadership Panel. We understand if it's too soon, but your piece touched people. Thank you for sharing truth so gently. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop and walked into Caleb's room. He was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, tongue slightly out in concentration crayons, scattered like fallen leaves. When he saw me, he beamed. "Look, Mommy." He held up the page, thick paper full of jagged sunbeams and soft green scribbles. A house stood in the center, small but warm-looking. 2 stick figures stood in front, one tall, one shorter, both smiling. "That's us," he said. "You and me. No grandparents, no siblings, no extra rooms filled with antique clocks or heirloom gilt. Just a home." My throat tightened. I knelt beside him, fingers tracing the corner of the drawing. "I love it," I whispered. "Should we hang it on the wall?" he asked. I paused, then shook my head. "Let's keep it in my bag," I said, close to me. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I opened the laptop again. I clicked reply. I'd be honored to speak. "Thank you." She tucked the drawing into her bag, not to frame, but to carry forward. "Can we drive by their house?" Caleb asked one afternoon, just to see it. The question came as we passed the old street maple trees shading the road with slow-turning leaves. Summer had slipped away quietly this year. Even the air felt softer, like it had tired of holding tension. I hesitated, but only for a moment. "Okay," I said. The tires hummed as we turned the corner. The Ward house came into view, still wearing its practiced symmetry. Tall hedges, white trim the bay window that had once framed our chore charts and holiday place cards. But time had pressed its thumbprint here, too. The grass had grown uneven, creeping over the brick path in tufts. One shutter leaned slightly. A few leaves clung to the gutter. It wasn't falling apart, but it wasn't cared for either. The kind of disrepair that came not from chaos, but apathy. I parked across the street. Caleb leaned forward in his booster, studying the facade like it was a diorama from school. His brow furrowed slightly. "It looks smaller now." I nodded. "It usually does." We sat in silence. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. I remembered the scent of pancake syrup and magazine perfume. The way Susan's voice never rose but always landed just heavy enough. The shape of Richard's back as he turned away from an empty plate and a hungry child. "Does anyone live there anymore?" Caleb asked quietly. I followed his gaze to the window. One curtain swayed slightly, caught by a breeze or maybe a ghost. But no one looked out. "Not really," I said. His head tilted against my shoulder. I felt the warmth of his cheek through the fabric of my sleeve. "I'm not hungry anymore," he whispered. I turned and kissed his hair. "I know, baby." Neither am I. Outside, the leaves rustled a slow cascade of rust and gold. Change never came fast in that neighborhood, but it came. I started the car. The engine hummed and the curtain moved again. No one came out. No apology. No confrontation. No more voicemails. Just distance. And the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need to raise its voice. The house stays behind them, silent and exactly where it belongs. The house still stood, but its silence no longer held power. What once symbolized legacy now echoed with absence, and a child's quiet hunger had spoken louder than years of pretense. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives on soft footsteps wrapped in truth and the strength to walk away. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it may arrive late, but once heard it changes everything. Sometimes survival is the loudest revenge.